Welcome to Lesson 5 and Unit 14, Change Over Time. In this lesson, students will work to answer the question, what are traits and what causes the traits of a living thing? In previous lessons, students have explored the life cycles of individual organisms. Students have compared these cycles to discover similarities and differences. In this lesson, students use visual data to generate a data table that describes the traits of dogs and how dog offspring are both similar and different than their parents. Students predict and observe how the environment can influence the traits of a living thing. Students figure out that traits are what an organism is like or how they behave. Organisms can inherit traits from parents or have traits that develop because of the environment. Organisms look different either because of inherited traits or environmental traits. This lesson is approximately 2 days. Students will determine how living things are the same and different in this section. Watch the following 1-minute video of a mother cat with her kittens. Ask students what they know, notice, or wonder about the cat and her kittens. Guide the conversation towards descriptions of the cat's physical traits. They might notice that the parent cat has different eye and fur color than the babies. In the Explore portion of this lesson, tell students, we are going to learn about characteristics known as traits of living things. What do you think are some examples of traits in humans? Allow students to turn and talk. Students may point out hair color, skin color, eye color, height, etc. Tell students that they are going to look at pictures to predict which dogs are the offspring of each dog parent. Assign 6 students to hold the 6 dog parent cards and the rest of the students to hold the offspring cards. Ask students to walk around the room and try to find their matching parent. Once all of the students have made their choice, have students sit down. Facilitate a discussion with students to find out how they know their dog family went together. Based off of their predictions and discussion, make a chart on chart paper and have students fill it out with you using the parent-offspring dog trait data on student page 12. After their data has been collected, you should refer to the dog card answer key to verify the matchups found in the tutorial. You will need to fill in the chart with characteristics which will be referred to as evidence that the students chose to make their predictions. You could shorten this lesson if necessary by only filling out 3 traits or only using 3 dogs as examples. You could ask students, how did you know your dogs were the offspring of parent dog A? Students might respond that they used the evidence of ear shape or fur color. These would each become characteristics on your data chart. Ask the students to notice the patterns in the data. For example, students might notice that parents look similar to their offspring, that siblings of each dog type look similar, and that there are differences from both parent to offspring and from sibling to sibling. Students also might notice that there are similarities among the dogs in general, like paws, tails, and fur. Though we have many different breeds of dogs with many trait variations among them, all dogs are the same type of living thing because they are the same species, so they share many traits. After you have created your data table and analyzed it, ask students what they think this table might show us about traits like fur color, ear shape, body shape, etc. Allow students to think, pair, share. Students may come to the conclusion that because offspring share similarities with their parents, this might mean that they get the trait from their parents. Tell students that this is what we call inheritance. There are similarities and differences among parents and offspring, among siblings, and among the dog species in general. In the Explain, read Inheritance of Traits, Why is my dog bigger than your dog? Refer to the Read Aloud guide on teacher page 11. You will only read until page 15 because the latter part of the book talks in depth about genetics and reproduction, and this is not necessary for students to know at this point in time. In the Elaborate, students will learn that some traits are inherited by offspring, and other traits are caused by the environment that they live in. Tell students. Examples of environment influence might include amount of food, amount of water, or amount of exercise. Refer back to the dog parent card of the Dachshund. For this series of questions, allow students to turn and talk to give all students a chance to explain their thinking. You can tell students that the dog in the picture weighs 20 pounds. Ask students to predict what the offspring of the dog would weigh. Students may predict about the same 20 pounds. Ask students if their prediction would change if they knew that the offspring would be fed 10 times a day by the owner. Students may predict that the dog would weigh much more than 20 pounds. Tell students that this is an example of how the environment could influence the traits of a living thing. Other examples might include how much water a plant gets. If it does not get enough, it might be much shorter than normal. Use observations from the plants you have been growing in class from Lesson 1 to discuss this. Give students a copy of trait examples found on student page 13. Have students write an example of an inherited trait of a living thing and an example of a trait of a living thing that was caused by the environment. If students are struggling with traits to choose, give them this list and allow them to decide if the trait is inherited or caused by the environment. For example, fur color, nose shape, eye color, height, and weight. Ask students to choose one of the traits they wrote about and write or draw evidence that the trait is inherited or environmentally influenced. Finally, ask students, what have we figured out today that might help us explain the pink katydid story? Students might respond that color could be an example of a trait. The pink trait could be inherited or environmental. The trait actually is not very common in the katydids that the scientists collected. Note: the pink coloration in this story is an example of an inherited trait. Ask students, what new questions do you have about pink katydids because of what we have learned so far? The optional extend activity involves students choosing a type of pet and then researching the variations of traits in that type of pet. For example, they may choose cats, goldfish, hamsters, or parakeets. In this lesson, students use visual data to generate a data table that describes the traits of dogs and how dog offspring are both similar and different than their parents. Students predicted and observed how the environment can influence the traits of a living thing. Students figured out that traits are what an organism is like or how they behave. Organisms can inherit traits from parents or have traits that develop because of the environment. Organisms look different and have variation either because of inherited traits or environmental traits. This lesson sets the foundation for the next lesson, where students will consider how an organism's traits may impact their ability to complete their life cycle to survive and reproduce.